By 6:45, your kid is rubbing their eyes, yawning, going a little glassy. By every sign you have ever learned to read, this is the window. So you start the routine. You ease them into bed, and somewhere around 7:15, the child who was melting into the couch half an hour ago is doing laps of the living room. Suddenly thirsty. Suddenly needs to tell you something urgent about a dinosaur. And physically incapable of lying still. That second wind is not your child winning a negotiation. It is not defiance, and it is not a stalling tactic they invented to break you. For a stretch of roughly an hour before sleep actually arrives, the human body runs a window in which it is biologically hardest to fall asleep. A kind of do not enter sign hung over the door to sleep at the precise moment you most need to walk through it. Sleep scientists have a name for that window. They call it the forbidden zone. Bedtime resistance gets blamed on a lot of things. Bad habits, too much screen time, a kid who needs firmer limits, or a kid who needs more cuddles. Depending on the night, any of those might be in the mix. But underneath the standoff sit three separate forces, all arriving at the same moment. And almost none of the advice you have been handed treats them as separate things. Pull them apart, and the whole fight starts to make a different kind of sense. Start with the strangest force, because it is the one no parenting account mentions. Your child does not have a single sleep signal. They have two, and the two do not always agree. The first is pressure. From the moment your kid wakes, a chemical drive for sleep begins building in the brain, climbing higher the longer they stay awake. The Swiss researcher Alexander Borbély laid this out in 1982 in a framework sleep scientists still build on today. He called it Process S, the homeostatic drive, and you can picture it as a tank that fills steadily across the day. By bedtime, the tank is full. That is the eye rubbing you saw at 6:45. But there is a second signal, and it is not a tank. It is a clock. The brain runs an internal 24-hour rhythm anchored by light that decides when the door to sleep is allowed to open at all. Sleep scientists call it Process C, the circadian signal. And in the last hour or two before that door opens, the clock does not wind down. It does the opposite. It fires its strongest burst of alertness of the entire day, an active wake-up call that pushes back against the rising pressure to sleep. That collision is the forbidden zone, first described by the sleep researcher Lavie in 1986, and mapped around the same time by Charles Czeisler and his colleagues. The tank is full, and the door is bolted for one more hour.
Your child is genuinely exhausted and genuinely unable to fall asleep. At the very same time, and from the outside, that looks exactly like a small person refusing to cooperate. For decades, this was studied mostly in adults, and you could fairly ask what it has to do with a 4-year-old at 7:15. A team led by Monique Lebourgeois went looking and published the answer in 2013. It is the part every tired parent deserves to know. They brought toddlers into the lab and measured the one thing that marks when each child's internal door is about to open: the evening rise of melatonin, the hormone that signals biological night. Saliva samples taken in dim light from very small children. Then they lined that internal timing up against the bedtime each child's parents had chosen. The mismatch predicted the misery. Toddlers put to bed well after their melatonin had risen, fell asleep quickly, and fought less.
Toddlers put down too early, before the door had opened, took longer to settle and resisted more. Same time on the clock on the wall, a completely different time on the clock inside the child. Roughly a quarter of toddlers and preschoolers have real trouble settling at night, and the researchers had a wonderfully exact phrase for one of its signatures: the curtain call. The kid who, minutes after lights out, is back at the door. One more drink, one more story, one more anything. Some curtain calls are a child who has discovered the door is an excellent place to renegotiate. And some are a child whose biology has simply not arrived at sleep yet, lying in the dark with a wide-awake brain, doing the only thing a small person can do with that, which is call for you. The second force has nothing to do with clocks. Bedtime is the longest separation of your child's day. 11, 12 hours, alone, in the dark, the single biggest stretch of being apart from you in the whole 24. And it is scheduled for the moment they are most tired and least able to cope with it. The pull to stay near you is not weakness, and it is not a manipulation. It is wired in early, around 8 months, as babies work out that you still exist after you leave the room. The milestone Piaget called object permanence, a matching fear arrives, separation anxiety. The Merck Manual, about as sober as medical sources get, puts its normal onset near 8 months, peaking between 10 and 18 months, and easing by around 2 years. The sharp clinical version fades. The underlying preference does not switch off at a birthday. For a lot of children, and especially the more sensitive ones, being left at night stays genuinely hard well into the preschool years. The protest at the door is not always about power. Sometimes it is the most honest thing they do all day. They would rather be near you, and bedtime is the one moment you reliably leave. The third force is the one the boundary-minded advice gets right, so give it its due. Sometime in the second year, a self comes online. The toddler discovers they are a separate person with their own will, and they begin testing how far it reaches, the famous draining no to almost everything. And from the child's side, the math is brutal. A small child controls almost none of their day, not the meals, not the schedule, and certainly not the moment it all has to stop. But bedtime, they can fight. It is one of the few levers in the house that visibly moves the adults. Sleep clinicians even have a name for this strain of it, the limit-setting type, the bedtime battle that is partly a child probing where the edges are, because probing edges is the developmental job of being 2 or 3. A full tank and a bolted door, the longest goodbye of the day. A brand new will with nowhere to push. 3 forces, 3 different origins, all landing on the same small bed at the same instant. And most advice grabs one of them, calls it the answer, and wonders why it only half works. This is why the 2 loudest camps each feel right to someone and wrong to someone else. The connection camp says the resistance is a bid for closeness, so you meet it with more closeness. The boundary camp says it is a learned habit and a test, so you hold a calm, consistent line. The connection people are right about the separation. The boundary people are right about the limit testing. They are each describing one real force and mistaking it for the whole animal. And both of them tend to skip the clock entirely, the one piece a parent cannot fix with more hugs or more firmness, because it was never about the relationship. It is about timing. And timing, if you have been losing the 7:15 fight for months, is almost good news, because it is the most fixable thing on the list. The highest leverage move is to stop fighting the clock and put bedtime where the child's biology actually is. There is a researched version of this, with a deeply unglamorous name, bedtime fading. You temporarily shift bedtime later, to the time your child genuinely falls asleep, rather than the time you wish they would, so that they drop off fast instead of banking 45 minutes of resistance in the dark. Once falling asleep quickly becomes the habit, you walk bedtime back earlier in small steps, 10 or 15 minutes at a time, and the internal clock tends to follow. In one trial of preschoolers, the time it took to fall asleep dropped by nearly half. The bedtime tantrums fell, and the gains were still holding 2 years later. If you just braced at the words shift bedtime later, because everything you have read warns that an overtired child floods with stress hormones, that is the one piece of received wisdom worth questioning. When researchers in a controlled trial led by Michael Gradisar actually measured it, gently moving bedtime later did not raise children's cortisol. And a year on, there was no difference in how securely those children were attached. The night-to-night second wind is mostly the clock, not a stress emergency you set off, by missing a window by 10 minutes. A few things stack on top of timing. Light is the lever that sets the clock, and young children are unusually sensitive to it, so bright light in the hour before bed pushes the door later, and keeping things dim and boring is doing real work. The wind down itself should be short and identical every night, the same few steps in the same order, because predictability is what lets a wired brain downshift. For the separation, the thing that helps is not proving you will never leave. It is making your return completely reliable. The brief, unexciting checkback that always comes, so the dark stops being a gamble. And for that brand new will, give it somewhere legitimate to push. The choices that are yours, stay yours, and bedtime is one of them. The choices that can be theirs, hand over without a fight. This pair of pajamas or that one? The blue cup or the green? 2 books and they choose which. A child who has spent some real autonomy on the small stuff arrives at the door with less to prove. One honest caveat, because this channel does not pretend everything reduces to timing. A handful of sleep problems are not behavioral at all. If your child habitually snores loudly, gasps, or breathes through their mouth all night, that belongs with your pediatrician rather than your bedtime routine, because it can point to something a sleep doctor should actually look at. Bedtime fighting that is severe, or that comes with a child who seems genuinely unwell or wiped out during the day, is a conversation with a professional, not a verdict you should be reaching alone at 11 at night with a search bar.
This is the general picture. Your specific child gets a real person who can see them. For the ordinary, grinding, every single night version, the one most of us are actually living, here is what you can put down. The bedtime battle is not a referendum on your authority, and it is not proof that you are too soft or that your child does not feel safe with you. It is, in large part, 3 biological systems failing to line up at the same inconvenient moment. A full tank, a bolted door, and a small person who would rather not be alone yet and has just worked out that they get a vote. None of that is a character flaw, in them or in you. So the next time it is 7:15 and the laps around the living room begin, you can stop reading it as a kid who is winning. The door inside them has not opened yet. Your job is smaller and kinder than the one you thought you were failing at. You are not breaking a will or winning a standoff. You are just helping a tired little body wait out the last stubborn hour until its own clock finally lets it sleep.